Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Brewing with Company,
Oh, damn, I
the
forgot
talk
this.
show slash podcast, or whatever the hell you want to call it, where a couple of average Joes drink a cup of Joe, talk about pop culture and video games. I am one of your hosts, me, and I am brought to you with you. How is you?
You is fine.
Me is also fine. Me is also fine. Today's topic is a simple one, as if you haven't heard the name The Last of Us out of my mouth enough. We're talking about The Last of Us today. And more importantly, now that it's been a few years, number one, are we getting The Last of Us Part 3? And number two, where the hell is that story gonna go? But before we get started, the whole point of this show is that we are caffeinated individuals with an average cup of Joe. What are you drinking?
Right now I am on my last bag of Konoha, and it's
That was
delicious.
fast.
I couldn't control myself.
I didn't want to come back and say Bones for a fourth time. And I really wish I had, because I'm drinking Vanilla Cream Black Rifle. Drinking Black Rifle Coffee Company. If you drink Black Rifle, you're paying for a lifestyle. You're paying for a brand. It's not that good a coffee. I mean, maybe to like stern coffee drinkers, which I feel like I am, but I don't know, dude. It is just so bitter.
Yeah.
Vanilla my ass, by the way. No vanilla.
What was the coffee? What was the coffee when we were deployed? Do you remember what that was called? What was that called?
Are you talking about the quick coffee where
Yeah,
you
it was
like just threw it in the cup and
green bean?
oh, green beans. You can't beat
Yeah.
green beans, bro. Green
That
beans is, if there's any military members that listen to this, or if anybody listens to this, green beans, man, that gets you through deployment right there.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Oh man. So speaking of
Last
deploying,
of Us, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna do a terrible segue into The Last of Us, so I think you did
I was
better.
just
You're
gonna-
fine.
I was just going to ask, Last of Us. I'm pretty sure I know someone who has a pretty deep obsession with that. But he couldn't be here today, so we're going to talk.
Wouldn't know a guy.
I'm just playing. So yeah, Last of Us Part 3. What do you think? I mean, obviously, we know what's going to happen, though, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's not confirmed, but
Has to. At the end of spoiler alert for a 5-year-old game, by the way,
and a 10-year-old game,
and a 10-year-old game, right? The way it ended, they definitely need to finish it. I will say one thing that I don't know if it's been said before, but it was a fine game, the second one, but did the first one really need a sequel?
I want to go back and be truthful to myself, like 6 or 7 years ago. Because number one, after I finished the first game for the first time, I was like 17 years old, and I was like, I want more now. But I feel like at the same time, I was also like, that's a beautiful way to just end things. And I wouldn't even really call it a cliffhanger. I know it is technically, but I wouldn't really even call it a cliffhanger. The whole seeing Ellie's face recognize that it's one of two ways. She's either believing Joel and concerned about that, or she doesn't believe Joel one bit. And I know part 2 comes along, and I think the message that part 2 sends is she didn't believe Joel at all the whole time.
Right.
Which is why she hunts for it in the flashbacks and things like that. I think part 1, in terms of necessity, did not need a sequel. But I personally think the end of part 2 does need a sequel. I think that part 3 does need to happen. But to put a stamp on it, we don't need a part 4. Just end it after this. There's no need for it. And plus, if there was a part 4, I'd be 100% positive Neil Druckmann ain't going to do it. So I would just leave it after that.
I mean, can you imagine if they did a part 4, then there's nothing stopping them from doing part 5, part 6, part 15.
And then there's Final Fantasy meets The Last of Us on Assassin's Creed Kingdom Hearts
Right.
and they all come together in one giant collab and stop Jupiter from taking over the Earth. That's where these things just like dive in way too much. To be honest, when they were talking, did you watch the Grounded documentary for part two?
Not yet. You told me to watch it, but I haven't had time.
I love the Grounded documentary because from the beginning of their enthusiasm to
Mhm.
the end of their like damn near regret to making the game, it opened up a lot of issues within Naughty Dog. It opened up a lot of issues within game development as a whole in terms of like rushing.
Mhm.
And then it also showed that making these giant projects is hard. So if they do a part 3, which I think they will,
Mhm.
I think it needs to be significantly smaller than part
Smaller
2.
in what way? Or it kind of ties
Length.
into
Yeah, sorry, length. Like
yeah,
pacing. Because
yeah.
I think part 2 overstayed its welcome in a lot of ways. 3 days in Seattle as both
Oh yeah,
characters was
yeah.
just too much. But I mean, I don't know. My thing is, do you think part 3 is a necessity?
At this point, yes, because my my take on everything really pretty much is storytelling, and at this point, there's the story that they were telling definitely stopped at a point where there wasn't enough that was revealed to the audience or excuse me, the gamers, the players, to actually have or just a good stopping point. You kind of mentioned something that I really liked. The first one, it did end in a way that had you wanting more, but um, for maybe the more, I don't want to say that you were immature, but for the more mature player, um, he would have thought, or he or she would have thought to themselves, like, okay, say that there was never a part two, and it's just Last of Us. You can create in your head what you think happened next after this, and it's more of a personal thing of how you interacted with the story of part one. So, you know, we built up a lot of things that would have happened that we thought was going to happen in part two, and things may have worked out that way, or may not have worked out that way, which is one of the reasons, in my opinion, why Last of Us Part Two was so divisive amongst the fans, because half of them were expecting stuff to happen, half of them were expecting other things to happen, and we got what we got. So. There is something that could be there's something to be said of ending something at its height, at its peak, which I believe now I did read this on Facebook, so we all know that if it's on Facebook, it's definitely true.
Of course.
um Larian Studios, I think, the Baldur's Gate folks,
Hmm.
they are not making Baldur's Gate 4, and they're not making any DLC. I don't know if you've heard about this yet,
I
but
did, and I
yeah,
think it's
so
smart.
that's smart. That's smart. In my opinion, that's smart. They're going to move on to some other project or whatnot, and they're just gonna let that because yes, what do we want more? Do we want more from Baldur's Gate? Of course, but they don't want to ruin it. They don't want to, or either ruin it, or they don't want to, like you said, overstay the welcome.
I think, to quote you, Mister You, let them be great.
Let them be great. They're
I
they're
think
just letting themselves be
it
great.
really is that simple. For The Last of Us specifically, I think it's hard because like I'm trying to separate my brain here, because
Sure.
if I haven't said it enough on this channel, I think that game for me, can't stress that enough, is perfection. It ticks every box I need in a video game. It's a linear narrative. The narrative is deep. It has in-depth meaning at every corner, and every time I play that game, which I've played it a lot, it I find something new in the details and the meanings of people's facial expressions, especially with part one, that remaster, in my opinion, but remake, um, does a great job of having those cutscenes be brought to life that much more, and you see these characters do what they do. So I think it definitely has an opportunity to be something great, because I personally love part two, bro. And at the end of the day, and I do really mean love, and I think I love it because I, one, am obsessed with the first one, and
Right.
two, it shares that universe. To me, the best character in The Last of Us is the world.
Ooh,
It's it's unforgiving, and that's the whole point. And I think people kind of, you're allowed to think this way, but I think people kind of threw that out of their brain when they were mad about spoiler Joel's death in the game. Is it's like when Joel died, I had no problem with that. As a
yeah,
matter of fact, it was,
I expected it.
I 100% expected it.
Yep.
I'm with the people that it's like, I wish I would have played as him a little longer,
True.
but at the same time, like, the dude is not a good person.
No.
If you really think about it, if you invest in this channel at all, I have two videos that are like the only two videos that are successful on this channel at the moment, and they're both about The Last of Us. And one thing that I would rather see than part 3 right now is something that I talked about before, is something that I made up in my head a long time ago, is a prequel. But you got me second guessing this a few weeks ago when we were talking about Avatar.
Yeah.
And you said there's something about the silence of not seeing something has its benefit.
Yeah.
And I've spent like 11 years thinking this prequel would be the perfect idea. And then you said that, and I was like, damn,
Right.
maybe it is a good thing we don't see the 20 years between Sarah's death and where we see Joel today.
Because
And
then we'll have a zookeeper dropout, help
yep.
Joel through.
Yep. Well, and it's like you can't unsee something.
Right.
That's like one of the greatest pieces of advice, is like, I can give you knowledge, but you can't unlearn something. And so it's like, if I see something in that prequel that I don't like, it can have an effect on the first game.
Because even though we understand the humanity of Joel, there's a mythos about him. Because we didn't see those 20 years of smuggling, of basically
Brutality.
being a yeah, right, of being who he was. And it's been built up in our heads and stuff. So we don't really need to see the real. It's kind of, you know what, it reminds me of remember in Game of Thrones when everyone thought that Ned Stark defeated Sir Arthur Dane, and after the battle of or excuse me, the battle of the Tower of Joy and everything, and
I'm
then
gonna
when
hurt your feelings.
oh no.
I can't stand Game of Thrones.
Ah, dang. Well,
I'm
see,
sorry.
I'm a big Song of Ice and Fire books. No one can see right now, but I have them behind me right now. But yeah, so just make a long story short, Bran Stark, he has the ability to see back in time, and he goes back to this moment, and you know, it's crazy because what happens is Sir Arthur Dane, one of the greatest swordsmen of the age, he's pretty much dog walking Ned Stark, his father, and basically what happens is Holland Reed stabs out Sir Arthur Dane in the back, and Ned Stark has always been, well, always was a very honorable man, and it was built up in his mythos. He's extremely honorable, but they win this crucial battle by stabbing one of the greatest knights in the world in the back, and then so Bran has a different opinion of his father after that. So it's stuff like that. Maybe you don't want to see Joel's I won't say origin, but Joel's past.
Well, I think I wouldn't mind a game that is somewhat prequel about Tommy. I know Neil Druckmann had kind of hinted that he had a like a smaller game in mind of like Tommy after him and Joel split up
That would be
after the
interesting.
apocalypse. That's a prequel that I don't mind seeing. I wouldn't mind it because, one, it still keeps Joel in the dark of what he does after him and Tommy become very ruthless and stuff like that. So I wouldn't mind seeing that. But the reality is we're not getting something like that. As much as I love that all these companies are doing games like that, I love the whole Spider-Man, then Miles Morales, and then the sequel. I
Yeah,
love small sequels. I hope that becomes a common video game thing, because I love that. It's a cheaper, shorter. It gives you the taste of what you had before, but with a new story.
Mhm.
But in reality, we're going to get part 3. If we're going to get something, it's going to be part 3.
How long do you
What?
think? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. How long do I think until what?
How long do you think it's gonna be until we actually get it? Because it's been how many years since part
He
2?
hasn't even confirmed it, and Neil Druckmann is very much a man of who he is. The same thing happened with part 2, right? He was like, I'm not writing this thing until I have a beginning, middle, and end, until it makes sense to flow with the story. And whether you like the story or not, part 2 does flow with the story and have a meaning in its story. It is a masterpiece. You're
Yeah,
allowed to not like it, but I feel like we can all agree, as those of us who love the art of video games, it's a freaking masterpiece. I believe, to put it in movie terms, it's up there with the Lord of the Rings trilogy and how it's made. How it's made. You know what I mean? I'm not talking about its story. I'm talking about how it's made, because it is beautifully crafted. I don't ever remember a single bug happening in The Last of Us Part 2 upon its release.
and
It is
and
beautiful.
just to clarify, you mean that as in like as you can tell that the developers love every inch of this world and
Some
every
freaking work was done.
yeah. So then
Yes.
that's what you mean by that. Of course, yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, there are plenty of games in this world that I think are absolute masterpieces, even if I don't necessarily like them.
I agree, and I say the
And
same thing for movies and TV shows as well.
like a hot topic for me is Skyrim. I'm
Right.
I'm not the biggest Skyrim fan, but I'm not gonna say it's bad, and I'm not gonna say it's not well crafted, because it did things for the entire video game industry as a whole,
Yeah.
and it is a masterpiece for what it is. So there's a difference between not liking something because it's just not scratching that itch for you,
Yeah.
and it's a bad video game.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I am getting a little. I really wish people would understand that, because like there are games that I will straight up tell you is a bad game, or even TV shows. Like for example, something about me is I will tell you straight up that let's see, an anime like Sword Art Online is terrible. Yet I can't stop watching it. Like I love it. It's one of my favorite shows. I have a poster back there of it. So just because somebody just because like we may critique a game or TV show or movie that one of our dear readers, or dear readers, excuse me, viewers might like, does not mean that we straight up hate that media. So, but yeah, no. What I kind of really wanted to ask you, um, so we all know that, like you just said, that Last of Us Part Two, even though it was very divisive, was still a masterpiece. Do you think that they can strike lightning a third time, or is that the phrase? You know what I mean?
Yeah, like lightning in a bottle twice.
There you go.
Well, that's kind of hard, because I don't even necessarily think The Last of Us Part 2 is the lightning in a bottle. Like, comparing to part 1. Part 2 to other video games, yeah, I would argue that. But comparing to part 1, I think it's going to be hard, man. Very rarely do you get all 3 ducks in a row.
Right.
Very rarely, both in movies, TV, or movies and video games. You
Literally,
very rarely.
Lord of the Rings did it. That's it.
I would argue that the newer Planet of the Apes trilogy did it. I think all 3 of those movies are very on par with each other.
The first opinion, but yeah, I would agree that's probably
It's hard. I would say the third one's the weakest, but it's still a great film.
Oh, yeah.
Or like The Godfather. The Godfather is a trilogy that was able to do it.
Do you
So
think?
Back to the Future. I'm just saying there are examples where it does work. I'm scared of 2 things. I'm scared of the wrap up effect, and I'm making that up. I don't. That's not like a coined term, but the wrap up effect, meaning we have to wrap up this story. Just think of something so we can get it out there. I don't want that. And the biggest thing I don't want, which I don't think Neil Druckmann will do, but I really have to say it, I don't want any future idea of the HBO series to be an influence on the game. I don't.
Yeah.
It's okay. And again, speaking of things that are well crafted, but I just don't like the HBO series of the Last of Us, because I don't I don't want any of that story to be changed, and they changed a lot of it, even
Right.
in minor details. So I don't want anything from any of the writers that assisted Neil Druckmann on the television show to be of any influence to part 3. I want Neil Druckmann to either succeed or sink on this on his own. And I will say Druckmann has earned the right for those of us who are major fan bases of these games,
Mm-hmm.
for us to, if it sinks, we still got to be like, you gave us something good, right? Obviously, we can critique further than that, but I think he's earned himself as a storyteller of, he can wrap this up. It may not be as good as the first 2, but it can be good enough. And for all we know, maybe he comes out and part 3 is better than part 1. Doubt it, but it's plausible. You know what I mean? He could very well wrap up the story to make, and a lot of times there are sequels that make its predecessors better because of its sequel.
That's
So
true.
you never know if part 3 comes around and makes part 2 better.
Yeah, I mean,
So
very well could.
my
Well,
question to you
yeah, sorry, I had
is,
questions in that.
I know, no, sorry. Where do you want the story to go? Quick synopsis.
Right. Where do I want the story to go? Well, I would want, honestly, I I don't think I want more from what's her name? Um Abby, like that. Now, I don't think that she should be completely out of the next game. I just think that uh there shouldn't be another like, oh, here's half the game where you're playing as as Abby again. You know what I mean? I don't think so. Like, maybe she could show up in the third act again. And there's some sort of resolution between, the beef between, or I don't know, what you really think. I don't know if the beef between Ellie and Abby is truly done. I mean, I know she lets her go, but like, um at the same time, I think there's still something that needs to be done between the two of them. So
I
yeah.
wouldn't mind having Abby in the story, but I
Hmm.
agree, having her being a main portion of the story, I think has like set its course.
Yeah.
I actually did like that about part 2, having her dad be the surgeon
Yeah, that was
that
interesting.
Joel took apart with. That was a good way to bring it into the mix. What I would want for part 3 is we jump ahead again 20 years. We're playing as an older Ellie, a Joel's age of Ellie.
Yeah.
Ish, give or take a few years. And I think Ellie has spent the last 20 years finding any other hospital or Firefly or anybody that can attempt to make the cure from her blood, from the stem in her brain, because she's overly obsessed with the idea that she lost her chance to save humanity. And this is her hunt for redemption. Also, keeping in mind that the world of The Last of Us, like I said, is unforgiving. Um, Whatever that means in the in between, I will leave that to the master of Neil Druckmann himself. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a major story writer or anything, but I would love an older Ellie, and you're hunting down, and then if you want to mix in that she ends up on what is it, the Catalina Islands at the end
Yeah.
of part
Yeah.
2? I need to Google it. Yeah.
I think so.
So if she finally ends up at the Catalina Islands because she didn't know that that's where Abby was going
Right.
and all these things, and then they meet up then and they start to develop a cure, and the cliffhanger at the end, which we actually end at this time, no part 4,
Right.
is Ellie takes one last breath to go in for surgery, and we don't know if the cure worked or not.
That would be interesting.
Not to get too dramatic.
And you know something? What about Abby becoming the doctor that performs the surgery?
I wouldn't trust that for shit. That girl has easily broken both of her hands in combat because she's
Oh, that's right.
basically
Yeah,
Ronda Rousey.
I forgot about the fight. Yeah, the fight. Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. I was thinking like it would be full circle, but yeah, no.
Lev
Lev could do it.
Lev could become the doctor.
Hmm. Interesting.
Or just, it doesn't even have to be
Yeah, it
that
doesn't have to be.
in depth, but I mean,
I was just trying to tie it full circle because
the
you.
storytelling part of your brain got ticking,
Yeah,
so
I know, right?
that works for me.
Yeah, but see that's the thing. That's the thing. Things need to stay what's the word? In continuity. Like so.
Agreed.
Man, that actually would be really cool. You never told me about that idea before. Hey, Neil Druckmann, if you be the one person to listen to this podcast, go ahead and
I would
go.
love to see in Grounded, the documentary of part 3,
Oh my,
Neil Druckmann's there like, when we were thinking about the story, I was watching Brewing with Company. It's this tiny little podcast that nobody listens to.
exactly.
And and he had this great idea of a 45-year-old Ellie running around, and she plays similar to Joel.
Oh yeah, that'd be
And,
that'd be actually really really cool. I was just thinking like it would be Ellie trying to find the rest of her family in Dina, and I'm sorry, but I can't remember the little boy's name right now.
JJ.
JJ. Um,
Or AJ?
I think you are right. Maybe it is AJ because excuse me. Um, yeah, but that would I was thinking that, and then I don't even know what it would be. Yeah, if she were to try and find a firefly, but there's just no one left, or no one who
Well,
can
and
believe.
it gives a great opportunity to get out of the United States too, because now outside of story, we got to think gameplay and setting, right?
True.
I I'm not saying she's got to end up in like China
Mexico.
or yeah or anything like that, but it's a great opportunity. South America is pretty reasonable.
Say, yeah, go to
Going to
Brazil.
like Brazil would be pretty cool. You could go, look at places like Rio, or anywhere. I mean, even if it's freaking Canada, like just gives an
Right?
opportunity to go somewhere else and provide different settings. Which was like everybody hated on the whole California thing, but I was on board with that. I was somewhere
Yeah.
new. It looked good because of the power of the PlayStation 4 Pro at the time, and I think it gives an opportunity to expand a little more, but still keep that inline feeling that Neil Druckmann has when like he always does. I trust Neil Druckmann, man. He got so much hate for The Last of Us Part 2. And
Yeah.
believe me, I am all about some of the story problems in Part 2. I am not in love with Part 2 like I am Part 1, but I really do think it's a masterpiece and it is world-class storytelling. It just the excuse of it made me feel drives me nuts. It
Oh
drives me
yeah.
crazy because I'm like, every story makes you feel.
That's the point of
Every
the story.
single one. That's the whole point of the story. So I think Neil, in a world where a bunch of enraged video gamers are constantly saying we need somebody to take risks in their stories and the way they do things, Neil Druckmann took a risk. He took the protagonist that you loved and blew his freaking kneecaps out and beat him over the head with a golf club. He
Mm-hmm.
quite literally beat your superhero up in his own freaking video game. He took a massive risk in bringing a whole new character that you now have to play as your quote unquote brute character of the game. He took risks. And I think that needs to be applauded because he did it with love and care. He didn't just do it because he can. He genuinely cares about this story. He wrote The Last of Us when he was in college as a short story with one of his buddies in college. I need to remember what the actual
I didn't
story
even
was
know.
called. It's like Man on the Run. Don't. I'll Google that here in a minute. But
I
yeah,
never knew
he
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 did
had
that.
developed. Yeah, he had developed the baseline story of The Last of Us when he was in college, and it's become so much more than that. And I think it needs to be applauded to an extent of he's making a masterclass in video games. Now, what Naughty Dog is doing right now is pissing me off, just like every other company, because they're canceling live service games that aren't working.
Mm.
But I think it could be. I'm on board for part 3, whether it
What
sinks
changes
or not.
would you like to see in the characters? Because me, I know I would like to see a little bit more character growth moments between like secondary characters. Because like uh, we didn't learn much in my. Well, I'm trying to think about this. You probably played the game more recently than I have, but like we didn't really
About four
learn.
months ago.
Yeah, we didn't really learn too much about like a lot of the main secondary characters. I'm sorry, that's a just the secondary characters. You know what I'm saying? Um, Besides maybe Dina, I guess we learned about Dina, but I know that the other ones died, but at the same time too, like I kind of was like, oh, he was kind of funny, I guess, but then now he's dead.
Jesse, yeah, Jesse was. This is how it feels to me, anyways. Jesse was just this sperm donor,
Yeah, pretty much.
like for lack of a better term, for real. He's literally just he has great voice acting. By the way, I don't know who does it, but it. Jesse is a very minor character, and he's cool. He's witty, but I don't really. I agree with you. I don't really latch on to him at all. I don't really latch on. I think the only one, you're right, that I would latch on to the most is Dina. I didn't care about Lev at all.
Not really.
Good or bad. I was very neutral about Lev. She was just kind of he, she, whatever. It was kind of there.
Right.
And her sister was like the redemption arc for Abby. I understand that when Isaac tried to kill them and she basically betrays Isaac and all this stuff. But these are all very forgettable parts of the game. I remember I hadn't played part 2 probably 2 years until I played it again after the first playthrough. Again, it didn't latch to me like part 1 did. But it's still a great game. So 2 years later I played it and I completely forgot Isaac was even a character. And that's a major point in that game. And he's
you just mentioned
this mob boss.
And I just only thought about him now. We've been talking about
and I forget about him every time I played. I played again 4 months ago and I go, oh duh, Isaac. That's like the whole point of the WLF is ran by Isaac. So I agree with you. I think more development in your characters, things like that. My only thing that I ask, continue the love of the craft.
Yes.
Yeah, continue making it with love.
Love the world too.
Yeah, exactly. Just continue making it, innovating with that enemy AI was so impressive when The Last of Us Part 2 came out. I think it was well deserving of Game of the Year. Ghost of Tsushima had an argument, and if you had to put me down and say what's the better game, I'd say overall game, Ghost of Tsushima is probably a better game, but Part 2 is my type of game, so I don't know.
Well, I would agree. I would agree with pretty much all of that. Except for the fact that I just kind of wish that you know what? I last thing I'll say is I wish that instead of, a third one, they just finished the story here. They just like you really only needed one more cutscene to kind of or finish the cutscene, the final cutscene differently so that it truly finished the story. Because no matter what happens, even if this third one is good, it's just gonna seem a little like because especially how long the second one is. I'm assuming that the third one's gonna be long too, right? So it's just gonna feel bloated.
Yeah, and that I don't want that, and I would agree. I think it can end. I could live without part 3. I can live without it. As much as I'm cool if I could live with it, I could just as much live without it. The scene at the end, I'd be a liar if I didn't say it didn't bring a little tear to my eye, where you do the final flashback cutscene with Joel and Ellie the night before Joel dies, and she slightly starts to forgive him. That kind of stuff, the emotion behind those games, that's why I come to video games, is stuff like that. I really love, like I was just telling you, I just started getting into this Metroidvania kick. So I started playing Ori and the oh my god, I can never remember what the first game is called. Something about the wild tree or something like that. But the opening of that game, the opening of that game was heart-wrenching in like 5 minutes. So it's like, I love storytelling, I love emotion, and I love taking risks. So if it wants to end with the tragedy that is Ellie's ending, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because it's a more of a reality setting. But let's be real, it's video games. It's making a ton of money. HBO needs a season 3. So Neil's going to do it. What I hope for, though, what I really, really, really hope for, and this will be my final words, is once part 3 is done, I want to see Neil take a step back, like he said, and do smaller projects with all of his love and have some care, a little less stressful, spend some more time with his kids, get vibrant with that kind of stuff. Like that's the reason Cory Barlog was able to do God of War was he had a kid, and it completely changed his outlook on life and gave us the new Santa Monica God of Wars. So I would love to see Neil do some smaller projects, do some shorter games that don't take 9 years to develop, 5 years to develop, something like 2 or 3 year indie style projects. And I would rather see those games come out of Neil until he's retired.
I would agree with that. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that is me. And that's you?
I am you. Yeah. No, I am you is me?
You is me, and I am me, and something like that. I don't know.
Well, me is good. Me is good.
Me is good too. All right, well, if y'all can just let us be great, we'll just be great. We'll let you be great. And let us know what you guys think in the comments.
We are brewing with company.
We are brewing.